Hey everyone, welcome back. This is part three of our three-part lecture on trying to tackle and understand the Research FRQ. For this part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you four Research FRQs that have been given in the last 3 years to AP Psychology students. These are actual AP FRQs, so it's a very genuine look at what you may be doing here in the next week or so. Keep in mind that a couple of things. One, it may be a little bit difficult to see my screen because I tried to fit this FRQ on a PowerPoint slide, and I recognize that that might be a little bit tricky. And then also keep in mind that I'm going to go relatively quickly, and so if you want to pause, if you want to come back and watch this, you can. But also, I'm going to upload all of the documents that you see online, and I'm also going to upload the rubrics, and I'm going to upload some student samples. So you'll have the opportunity to kind of digest this information and look through this information when you have the time necessary to do so. So let's go ahead and get started. This FRQ was given last year, and I'm going to read it to you, so kind of bear with me here. A psychologist conducted a study at her home during an annual activity of children wearing masks and going door to door receiving candy. I don't know why they didn't just say Halloween. That's what it's talking about. Some of the children arrived alone, while others arrived in a group. Over the course of the night, the psychologist asked half of the children to remove their masks when they arrived at her door. The remaining half kept their masks on. The psychologist told every child to take only one piece of candy. She then went inside the house, leaving the bowl of candy outside. This gave children the opportunity to take additional candy. The psychologist measured the percentage of children who took additional candy. The psychologist's hypotheses were that children would take more candy when they were alone, and that children would take more candy when they were masked. The results are shown in the graph below. Assume all differences are significant. And then you can see the chart itself. So, real classic Research FRQ here. Gives you a scenario. You may want to read it once or twice, kind of go slow, digest what it's saying, and then below that are your questions. So the first question, identify the operational definition of the dependent variable in this study. So you got to look at, okay, well, what is she manipulating? That's the independent variable, right? As far as what she's manipulating whether or not she's asking them to take the masks off. The dependent variable, what is she actually measuring? Well, what she's measuring is how much more candy they take, right? Like the percentage of students taking additional candy, what you can see there on the y-axis. Now, you want to make sure that you have an operational definition. And so the dependent variable might be something like honesty, right? But we specifically, how is she measuring that? She's measuring how much candy they're taking. Part B. Explain how the data supports or does not support each of the psychologist's hypotheses. So she had two hypotheses, and you can see that in this sentence here, that children would take more candy when they were alone. Well, you can see here that solo children, which is kind of the dark black, took less candy than groups of children. So that first hypothesis is wrong. It looks like more children took candy if they were with a group. Her second hypothesis is that children would take more candy when they were masked. And you can see that when we keep the mask on, for both groups, solo children and groups of children, they did in fact take more candy. So her first hypothesis is wrong. Her second hypothesis is correct. And so if you were answering this FRQ, you would write that out and you would explain why that is the case, why the first one was wrong, why the second one was correct. Part C, explain why the psychologist cannot generalize her findings to all children. For this, you would want to write something about the idea of like random selection. These are not just randomly selected children of all children in the country, right? Instead, these are just the children that came to her door in her neighborhood, and maybe she lives in a part of the country where the children are very dishonest and very likely to steal more candy and things, and so she's unable to generalize because her sample is not random. And then finally, explain why the study is not naturalistic observation. It may seem like naturalistic observation, right? She's kind of peeking through the window to see what they do. But the reality is that she has manipulated the environment. She's manipulated a variable. She has asked some students or some children to take off the mask and others not to. And so the fact that she's manipulated what's going on here tells us that, in fact, it has to be an experiment.
Here's another Research FRQ from 2019. And I only did part of it because only part of it really deals with research. Professor Menendez conducted an experiment to investigate the effects of a new medication for treating the symptoms of OCD. Part A is more of an application question. Explain the concept of compulsion in the context of OCD. And remember, compulsion is just repetitive actions. The obsession is repetitive thought. Compulsion is repetitive action. So we're not going to spend much time on Part A. I want you to look specifically at Part B. Explain why each of the following would be used in this experiment to help establish cause and effect. Random assignment. Random assignment is when everyone who is participating has an equal chance of being part of the control group and the experimental group. We use random assignment to try to reduce the possibility that there might be some differences among these groups. If you random assign people to a control and experimental group, that helps diminish the differences between them. And then placebo condition, why is that important to establish cause and effect? We want to make sure that the control group is given a placebo to see if the drug actually has therapeutic value, or perhaps just the perception that they're taking this drug allows them to change somehow. And so if you want to know whether or not a change in behavior is because of a drug or a mindset, it's important that you use a placebo. Let's look at this next one here. 2018 FRQ. A survey was conducted to determine the state of the physical and psychological health of high school students. Pretty straightforward. Part A. Some of the survey questions related to student stress levels and student absences due to illness. The data on these variables are displayed below. And you can see there's a scatter plot. This looks like a correlation, right? Along our x-axis, we have the stress level, y-axis, the number of absences. So here are the questions. First one, what is the most appropriate conclusion that can be drawn based on the figure below? Remember, correlation does not equal causation. When they're scoring this, they just want to make sure that you notice that as stress levels increase, so do the number of absences. Or you could write as absences increase, it appears that so do the levels of stress. You want to make sure that you avoid definitive terms, though. You cannot write something like increase in stress will cause an increase in illness, because if they see these definitive terms, like it guarantees that one will go up or one will go down, that's cause and effect, and you would not get the point. So you just want to draw attention to the fact that it's predictable. It's a trend. As we see one go up, it appears as if the other one is likely to go up. You could also write that this is a positive correlation between the two factors. Next part. Explain how the data depicted in the graph are consistent with the exhaustion stage of the general adaptation syndrome. Remember, with the general adaptation syndrome, what we sometimes call GAS, you have the alarm stage, the resistance stage, and that third stage is the exhaustion stage. And what we know from the exhaustion stage is as you are continually stressed over and over and over again, at some point your resources are depleted and your immune system is compromised, you're more likely to get sick. So you could write to the fact that as stress continues on and continues to grow, you're more likely to get sick. It's a good example of how you can use application type questions within a research FRQ. Okay. Next question here. A researcher wants to conduct another study using the same variables, but wants to set it up as an experiment. Explain one reason that an IRB might not approve this new study. Well, think about the ethical guidelines of experimentation. That third ethical guideline of experimentation is do no harm, right? Freedom from physical or psychological harm. You could not ethically set up an experiment where you are intentionally causing students to be incredibly stressed, or you can't set up an experiment where you are causing students to get sick, right, and miss school. It's unethical. I'm going to skip part B. Part B are application type questions to a research study. And so you can look at it there. It's essentially talking about risky behavior, and then it actually includes two social psychology terms. And as a reminder, on the 2020 AP exam, there won't be any social psych terms. So you would not see something like de-individuation or normative social influence. Those are both social psych terms. But it's good to remember that on research FRQs, they will still throw concepts at you from these other units that you'll need to know about. All right, last one. This is from 2017. Part A, explain how each of the following plays a role in eating behavior. And then there's a bunch of terms there.
we're not going to go into those because this is application based. So what you would do for these is you would use DEA, define these terms, explain these terms, and apply to how they could play a role in eating behavior, right? How can external cues play a role in eating behavior? You know, the fact that you drive by your favorite restaurant or you smell something delicious cooking in the kitchen. These are external cues that can impact your eating. That's what you do for part A. Let's jump down to the research part, which is part B. A study was conducted to investigate the role of framing, that's how we word things, right? The role of framing on concern for healthy eating. Each participant, and there were 100 participants, that's what N equals 100 means, was randomly assigned to one of two conditions. There's a big keyword there, randomly assigned. In the first condition, the participants read an article indicating that obesity is a disease. Participants in the second condition read an article indicating that obesity is the result of personal behaviors and decisions. If this sounds familiar, it's because we kind of talked about this one in class. Participants were then asked to indicate how important it would be for them to eat a healthy diet. Scores range from 1, not important, to 9, very important. The results are presented below. So here are the three questions that deal with kind of the research aspect. 1, operationally define the dependent variable. So again, what are they measuring? Well, what they're measuring here is how important they believe it is to eat a healthy diet. But that's not enough. You have to operationally define that. And so, well, how do we know how important? It's on this scale of 1 to 9. And you would have to write that out, like a self-reported scale of not very important to important. It's an operational definition. What makes the study experimental rather than correlational? Here you could bring in that concept of random assignment and how there's two groups and how some people were given a control group, some people were given a group of one particular variable and then others a different variable of how they're framing it, whether it be a disease group, right, or a personal behavior group. And then finally, what is the most appropriate conclusion the researchers can draw about the relationship between the two variables? You can look at just the chart here, and it seems apparent that behavior, the mean score, was twice as high as disease. In other words, if people were framed the question that obesity is the result of personal behaviors, they are more likely to have a concern for healthy eating than if someone was told that obesity is a disease. They have less of a concern of healthy eating. And so you would write that out in your last paragraph there. Okay, that was a lot, 4 FRQs. Again, I'll post all of these FRQs, the rubrics, and some student samples online so you can look at them in more detail. This is one where if I said something that's confusing to you, certainly reach out and let me know, and best of luck.